So, what do you want to talk about first?
Well, first of all, maybe we should just remind everybody who we are. So why don't you go ahead first?
Well, I'm Amber Gabriel, Jim's cousin, and I suppose I do call you Jim now, right? Not James
Yeah.
or Jimmy. Is that the right?
Jim is best.
Okay. So I'm Jim's cousin, and we both ended up writing books, which is fun. And I write medieval action adventure, fantasy romance, and just like write things that I want to read, and it's really fun. I'm really enjoying it. I also did publish my first children's book last year for my elementary students because they kept pestering me, when are you going to write something for us, Miss Gabriel? So I finally did.
It's neat that as cousins both we both have a lot in common, even though we've really only seen each other 4 times, and I don't remember the first time because I was a baby. You're a little
Yeah,
bit
I think
older
I
than
have a
me, but
picture
not
of it.
much. What's that?
I think I have a picture of it, maybe.
Maybe.
Mhm.
And we the last time we saw each other was approximately 30 years ago. So it's been a while. I was actually amazed to see, reading some of your books, how we actually had a lot of things in common that we write about.
Mm.
Obviously, you know, there are a lot of differences too, but there's a lot that we both are writing about that kind of meshes with each other.
Yeah, we
Um,
both did medieval type stories with the sword fighting and things like that.
yeah, yeah,
Aunt Sue prefers the westerns and the more American history type.
right.
Um, we both went with the more
Um, and
Abbey
and
Western.
I mean, we are both Christians, and so that does affect our writing. And I guess we've had a little bit different approach to it. Uh, as far as I know, our faith in Christ is important to both of us. But uh, and of course, I'm just starting out. I mean, I've got like 3 books out there that are complete, and you've got more than that. But as a Christian, how does that affect your writing? And if somebody's reading your books, um, can they tell that you're a Christian if they didn't know? And how does that work out?
Well, that's definitely my goal, is, and my operating beliefs is that a book written by a Christian should be different than one that's not. Even if you're not publishing it as Christian fiction, the way that a Christian approaches writing should be different. So my goal was to write entertaining stories that a Christian could read, without feeling like they were crossing the line morally with their thoughts or their spending their time. Um,
Right.
so that what's considered clean fiction, even if it doesn't have a direct um, allegory to Christianity in that fantasy world, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And everything I've published so far has actually been overtly Christian. So I'm actually talking about the characters and their relationship with God and that kind of thing. So it is a little different approach, but it's interesting because your books, for instance, can be picked up by somebody who's not a Christian at all, and they are not going to be immediately turned off by it if they don't like Christian things.
Mhm.
On the other hand, for mine, hopefully they know before they start because it's labeled as such that what they're getting into. But it's definitely a little different approach. We've done it a little differently, you and I, that way. But
I
it's
think
it is very
your
important.
introduction in Nilo is very clear about your approach, and I thought that was good that you included that. I always like the reader to know where I'm coming from with things, and try to have some sort of author's note or explanation too, so that they know.
So yes, I've just brought out my first book that is by myself, and that is called Nilo of Meridon, and it is published as a an Amazon Kindle ebook right now. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. You can either purchase it as an ebook or use the Kindle Unlimited feature. And I am preparing to get it ready for print publication. It's a process. It was easier to get it up there first as an ebook, and
Yes.
I have to take my time going through the process. It's a little lengthier process to get it ready for print. So what about your books? You want to tell what your series, you've got one big series in particular, and if you want to mention that a little bit. I think I see your map behind you
Yes.
that where your books take place.
Yes, maps are very important, and you have a map too, whether it's a made-up country or not a made-up country, to be able to accurately describe how far it takes to get from one place to another, where everything is in relation to everything else. I even have, for myself in my writing that is not published, like prevailing wind charts and current maps and things like that, so that I can be consistent when I'm describing the way that the wind is blowing the ship at a certain time of the year, things like that. So I decided to write medieval fiction just because I like the sword fighting aspect. I grew up watching Prince Valiant and Robin Hood and all those things.
Well, just I did not know you were going to say that.
Hmm.
But it just so happens that within reach, and for random reasons, I have try to put it where you can see it.
Oh,
It's not going to work with the background,
hold it
but
maybe closer to yourself. Oh, yeah, look at that.
this is a full. Yeah, my background's interfering. I apologize for that. Now, I bought that for certain reason recently, and I've not followed Prince Valiant very directly, but I was thinking of the possibility of having Nilo made into an actual graphic novel.
Hmm.
And so I was thinking of what format, what ones I had seen that it would sort of be comparable to. And Prince Valiant came to mind, so I ordered that to kind of get a feel for it. And so it's just really funny that you mentioned that, because um, up until recently I didn't have that, and I used to see it in the newspaper, but I didn't really follow it real closely.
Yes, I read it for a couple of years when we got the paper, but and my dad, I remember reading it when he was younger. He told me about it, so yeah,
Yeah.
that's funny. So,
Yes, and your series, what's the name of the series again?
the Edge of the Sword series. So I called it the Edge of the Sword because a long sword has two sharp edges, and there's two sides to every story.
Ah,
And also the edge on the sword being sharp, you have to be careful with it. You can, it's easy to cut yourself. And biblically, the government, the sword was the symbol of the government because they were in charge of defense and implementing justice. So that's why it's the symbol for this series,
that's
because
great. I hadn't quite put that together, but that makes a lot of sense.
mhm.
I went through a big struggle trying to name Nilo of Meridon, because I wanted something more like what you had, as far as something very symbolic meaning, but I just drew a blank. I had written the whole book out and was like, what am I going to call this thing? And I just couldn't come up with it. But um, Meridon is the primary island. Well, it's the island where Nilo lives, and it's part of Tir which is a chain of islands all under one kingdom. And my story takes place around 930 BC. And it is intended to be the first in a series. I actually have the second one mostly written through to the end, but I need to go back through and edit it some more and get it ready for publication also. And then the intention is to have several more books in the series with quite a story arc. So your books in The Edge of the Sword, they actually they do follow on to each other, and a lot of the characters you'll see again from book to book. More maybe not every, obviously not every character makes it into the next book, but you'll see some of them repeating. It is interesting to see some of your characters develop additionally in later books compared to how they started out.
Mhm.
And in fact, I I've read three of them actually. How many are there? Are there five or six, or how many?
There's six. There will be a total of seven. So there's one more
Okay,
that will come out
so
in
you are
November.
still working on it. Good. Okay.
Yes.
Um, and so we had one that was called The Crack in the Rock, and that's the first in the series.
Yes.
Now I think I saw a couple references to the crack and the rock in the book, but I was actually trying to I was trying to pick out with your title exactly what you meant, and I think I don't know if you want to say too much about that, I think I saw the symbolism of the crack and the rock, and what you meant by it there.
Yes, I didn't clearly come out and say. So do you want me to explain it, or do you want me to
Yeah,
say
if
what
you
you
want
think
to,
it is
yeah.
first?
Yeah, go ahead. Or at least, I mean, without spoiling anything, of course.
Right. Well, there's more than one meaning that could be put to it. My overall thought with that particular title um, was that the uh, relationship between the king and his wives was something that was going to cause trouble in the future.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's a crack in
Okay.
uh, the royal family
Yeah.
that, and a crack in the country really too, because
Yeah.
the fact that it is still legal causes issues. Um, Also, with the villain in that particular story, he's still there, even though he's been uh, sidelined is not the word that I want, but he's been taken care of. He's been limited in what he's able to do now,
Sure.
but he's still there. So there's a potential for causing trouble in the future. So,
Right.
but I
Yeah.
also allude to the rock cycle and weathering and erosion in the story too,
Yes.
and sometimes breaking things down in order to make something new is not a bad thing.
Yeah. And so, when I said that you and I like to write about some of the same things, it's interesting that we like to actually talk about some difficult topics sometimes. And so in that book, you, as you mentioned, the king ended up with multiple wives. Um, and so, and we know this is the case in even in some countries today. And it's polygamy is it's definitely something that happened a lot in Bible times. And so that's something that you dove right into, and you covered it pretty head on. So um, a lot of people wouldn't do that, wouldn't, or if they did, I mean, a lot of Christians wouldn't just jump in there and tackle that topic.
Mhm.
So, what was that like writing that book?
Well, it was interesting because I didn't plan on writing that book. I actually wrote The Warrior Prince of Baruch first, but for some
Yeah,
strange reason, I stated that King Cyrus had two wives and that they got along. And then later, when I finished, I'm like, why in the world did I say that? And then my
and it
mind
was
went
too late to
blank
take it
back.
back.
Right. And then I think, well, how in the world does that work and why? And so then I had to go back and think of a story, and I wanted to make a story where you still liked all the characters at the end too, um,
Yeah,
because um, so that's kind of the way that it turned out. That's why it turned out the way it did. But I interviewed a lot of people for that story. Interestingly, polygamy is becoming more legal and more common now than it used to be, rather than the other way around.
even
Uh,
in the United States.
Even in the United States.
Yeah,
Utah, for example, as a state, not federally, but as a
Right.
state, basically decided they were no longer going to prosecute it. There are a lot of reasons today still why people will enter into polygamous relationships,
Sure.
for religious reasons, for economic reasons, besides what we're used to hearing in the United States, where for religious or reasons where you need to marry multiple wives in order to get into heaven. But um, in other countries, it's still where women don't have the job opportunities that we have here.
Right.
Sometimes they feel like that's their only option. So
Yeah.
there's still a lot of that, more of that happening than you would think.
So it's one thing to write about that in a book for adults. Now, I don't know if I mentioned to you that in the second Nilo book, they're actually going to talk about it.
Mhm.
Not in the same depth that you do, but it's going to come up because one of the cultures in the book they don't do that, and another culture they do. And so when these two cultures clash, or maybe it's better to just say interact because it's not an immediate clash necessarily, but they that's one thing, that a topic that comes up, and that one of the cultures thinks that it's really strange that the other culture does not do this, and then the other one thinks it's really strange that they do have
Mhm.
multiple wives. And so that comes to be a bit of a question for even these what we call teenagers, as and they're not married, and they're somewhat thinking about marriage. Now Nilo, for instance, my main character, he's 13 and he's really not ready for all this, and he gets thrust into some really grown-up responsibilities at a young age, and he finds that wherever he goes, it seems like um, the girls are interested in him, but he's not ready for that.
Mhm.
So it's probably a good thing he's not ready for it, because um, otherwise he might have a lot more trouble. But they get kind of frustrated about it. But they are, they're talking about these things, and you know, and at that time in that place, polygamy has become a big problem, or not a problem, but the question of it is a problem to the kids as they're discussing it. But that's in the next book. In the first book, they have other issues. They have idolatry.
Mhm.
Idolatry has only recently come to this island, and it was brought by another culture. And Nilo's people always used to worship the one true God, and they would sacrifice lambs to God. And there's actually, we think of this with the Hebrew Israelite culture and with the law of Moses in the Bible and all that, and that's true. If you go back into Genesis, you see they did that ever since Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and right down through Noah, and all the way before Abraham even, and before there was a law of Moses, these people were sacrificing animals to God.
And I never thought
And
about it that way until I read your book. But yeah, that's
yeah,
quite possible that people were doing that for quite some time afterward if they kept that oral tradition.
well, and we do see Job, and it's not exactly clear. People differ in opinion as to how long ago Job lived, but he was not in that Israelite line
Right.
directly, at least, and he did it. And but a very interesting thing that I've seen is that some historical sources show that they did this in ancient China, that
Hmm.
they were monotheistic in the earliest times when China was first settled.
So
So, yeah,
I was just going to interrupt real quick. Where exactly is um, Terracothrum? Is that the right? Am I pronouncing it right?
Tirnacothram is an island chain that's imaginary. You're just sort of like your lands there are imaginary, but it's supposed to be in the North Atlantic. And if you are familiar with your um, Irish, Scottish, Norwegian Viking cultures. There's a lot of similarities there in that North Atlantic region. And you think of even like the Orkney Islands, the Shetlands, some of these various island groups out there where people have lived for many years. And this is so long in the past that it really, I've taken some liberties, but at some point you can't just try to recreate history. You got to do your own thing. So when you're writing this kind of fiction, and I'm not trying to document somebody that was actually there, but I have drawn a lot from the Celtic culture and from some of the Viking culture, and there's some interaction with some other cultures that you'll find out. They actually meet some people there. Some people have come to the islands from Israel and the Mediterranean and interacted with them. This was in the time of King Solomon. And at that time, the Bible records that King Solomon's men went out with the ships from Tyre and Sidon, the Phoenicians, which are also evidently very closely related to the Philistines. And at times when they weren't at war with these people, they were actually cooperating with them and sailing all around Africa and different places, bringing back treasure from all over, as far all over the world as they could find. As far, we don't know exactly how far they traveled. So it seems that they went at least as far as England, and places like that. But it gets murky, the history back then. So
stay tuned for more episodes of Cousin to Cousin. Find our books on Amazon and Kindle.